right. Welcome, everybody. And this session is going to be in English, so I believe they have already provided you with the QR code if you would like to follow in French. They're really good translation, but we would like to conduct the interview or the session in English if possible. So my name is Pırıl, and I am the group head of sustainability for Allianz Trade. I have been working in sustainability more than 15 years, and I'm passionate of transforming corporations in a more sustainable way. I always say that sustainability is like wearing 3D glasses. Once you put it on, you see the third dimension that you were missing. So this is my, I would say, ambition in life to really put that 3D glasses on every corporate. Today I'm joined with these two gentlemen who are, I did the privilege to have the session together. I would like to give a little bit of a short introduction to both of them, which I'm not going to be, in full fairness. They are very decorated in terms of their achievements, so please excuse me. And then if you would like to know more, I'm sure that you can read it more on LinkedIn, and you probably all have a Wikipedia page by now, so you would like that continue. So I'm joined by Philippe Kunter. Philippe is the director of the Division for Sustainable Development and Corporate Social Responsibility for BPA France. He has an extensive experience in fostering sustainable growth and innovation. He is driving forward-thinking initiatives that support the development of green technologies and sustainable business practices. We have spoken that you also work a lot with the SMEs, providing guidance, resources, funding, opportunities to help them innovate and adopt sustainable practices. Welcome, Philippe. And then I'm also joined by Wolfgang Blau. He's the global managing partner for sustainable business for Brunswick. And he's also the Global Climate Hub managing partner, expert in climate communications. He's the co-founder of the Oxford Climate Journalism Network at Oxford University. It's a global network that trains journalists from more than 300 leading news organizations each year on how to improve their climate journalism. So today we would like to get you on board with a journey where we're going to be looking into the regulation world, which is super exciting, but we're going to tell you why it is super exciting. And our ambition is to in particularly look at CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. When we were preparing for this session, it was in the midst of the very famous EU Omnibus discussion, so we didn't know where it was going to go, but we had some ideas. But we really wanted to pin it down to this directive because we, I think on a common ground, believe that there's a value within the CSRD, and we would like to discuss beyond the reporting part of it, what it really means. So if you allow us, we're going to first discuss a little bit of the drivers of this directive, go a little bit of our experience, but also deep dive in more tangibly what it actually creates value for, and then end with maybe a little bit of optimistic remarks at the end. So before I start, maybe we do a little bit of a show of hands to get the impulse from you. So if you can show of hands, how many of you think CSRD is an extremely complex exercise? Right? I think we all agree. Okay. So show of hands, besides the complexity, if you agree it's a waste of time directive. Waste of time? It's complex, but you see the value? All right, very good. And maybe just to also understand your, like in the mixture, can you show of hands if you are an SME, small or medium-sized corporation? Yeah, okay, so we have a lot of, BP France. Okay, perfect. So let's see, for the complexity part also, do we change your mind at the end? But I'm very happy to see that you're with us on the value side of the CSRD. So maybe I start with Wolfgang, because I would like to maybe set the scene on where this directive came from, what was the urgency about it, what was the intention, who actually wrote this, and if you can give a little bit of that, like introduction to CSRD.
Sure, thank you, and thank you also for letting me speak English here today. When a government or an executive body issues something as voluminous as the CSRD and this other related directive, the CS3D, leave it to the EU and its acronyms, it knows that it costs it political capital. It's a major investment, so something really important must have happened. And I would say there are three main buckets of motivations. The first one is this realization that climate has moved from being a peripheral issue to the center ground of the political debate, and it has become an issue that defines Europe's economic competitiveness. And that has been exacerbated, of course, by the Biden administration and the Inflation Reduction Act, where suddenly the Americans dropped the so-called green $1 trillion and said, we want to lead this next economic growth cycle in the energy transition. That came as a bit of a shock to the Europeans, because we always thought we are the green leaders, and suddenly we're no longer. The second was this realization that we in Europe have pretty much missed out on the digital revolution, right? We don't have many global digital players. Europe is less deindustrialized than the US, so there was this understanding that this would be a chance for us, given how much machinery is involved in this green transition, for us to have a new chance at this next economic growth cycle. So economic reasons, China has its own version of a Green Deal, and climate and the energy transition, we may not say climate anymore, 3/4 of the greenhouse gas problem has to do with fossil fuels. So now we all speak about the energy transition, is now this big competition between China, Europe, and the US. So that's the economic motivation. The second, of course, is a motivation of security, where the impacts are going up. And many journalists even don't know that Europe is warming at twice the rate than the global average. So 1.5 in Europe, we have long passed. That's done. The reasons are not quite understood yet. One is that we are farther north. We tend to forget that Washington, D.C. is roughly on the same latitude as Sicily. And the closer you are to the Arctic, the more of that Arctic amplification you have, because the Arctic warms faster than any other region. The jet stream does its thing around Europe, and then Europe's industrial and population centers are more landlocked. So we're just much more vulnerable. And we're also more vulnerable to, for instance, the military risks that come with global warming, and of course also climate-induced migration, where we're in a different position than, let's say, North America. So those are really important reasons for Europe to move quickly. And then we know that the differences between 1.5 and 2 degrees warming sounds benign, right? But the difference is not 33% uplift, it's much worse on some metrics. And at the going rate of emissions currently, we have less than 10 years globally to keep it at 1.5 and less than 20 years to keep it at or below 2 degrees. And we know by now, which we didn't quite know 2015 when the Paris Agreement was signed, how dramatic and how dangerous 2 degrees are in the extreme weather events they trigger. And then coming back to economics, the damages these extreme weather events are already triggering, which you, of course, know from being in the insurance industry. So those are powerful motivators. And maybe as a last point, what makes this CSRD so different from all the ESG disclosures we have been seeing now for so many years. The theory of change was that you force companies to disclose, and somehow through public shaming and naming, investors, employees, other stakeholders would apply pressure. That hasn't quite come true. And the big change, the qualitative change, almost a step change in how to use legislation in the CSRD is that governments now say, it's no longer enough to just disclose, now we want a transition plan from you. We want to see what you're doing, not in 2049 for your 2050 target in the most extreme case, but we want to see every year now, how much CapEx are you investing against these commitments? That really is a step change, and it has to do with this time pressure.
I think that set the scene really well about where it is coming from. I think one thing you told me, which is that when we speak about the complexity, where is it coming from? And he said that it is because the accountants wrote the directive, not the sustainability experts. So maybe, Philippe, you also published the CSRD, right? So you went with blood and tear with all the, the phases of double materiality, the significance, frameworks. Was it as complex as everybody complains about it?
Good afternoon. The adoption of CSRD for BPI France was, at the beginning, we think that this is a great opportunity for the business, for the companies, because, in our view, it was a good way to improve the action plan in terms of ESG and to integrate in our financial models the impact dimension. So for us, we have thought that it was a good manner, in fact, to progress and to help companies, small and medium companies, to go ahead on this action plan. But the exercise is quite difficult. And what I can say, in fact, there's a lot of positive points for the CSRD. I will begin by the positive points. Transparency, it's totally clear. So you are obliged to detail process, to give figures, and to think about the exercise and to produce. So this is the help of transparency. This is a good point for the governance, because it's impossible to realize this exercise without your own governance. So it's very linked. You have to report, you have to give information, because at the end of the exercise, you will have auditors who will give a response to your exercise. So this is a good point. So it's a good way to connect all the directions of a company in the same target, in fact. Another point is to facilitate the connection between the different directions, because this exercise requires a lot of control points, in fact. We speak about 1,000 in theory, of course, but in the practice is less. In our case, we are at roughly 700 points. So it's huge. And so it was very good for us, because we realized this exercise to be aware of the difficulty to manage this exercise. And, but in the same time, this is the but, in fact, we consider that it's very difficult for small and medium companies. And I'm sure we will discuss about that point. But we have to find another way, and this is the discussion, but we will speak about further with Omnibus, to find another way. It's important not to break or to slow down the exercise. This is important to have less granularity of information, but in the same time, another but, large company will ask to, in the supply chain, in the chain value, to the small and medium companies, information in order to realize their report. So we have to find and to think about this, but this is a very good exercise in terms of progress in data, governance, transparency, accuracy. Good exercise, but quite difficult. And for BPI France, it's mobilized two responsible, senior, and two junior, in fact, for this exercise for a lot of months. So it's not so easy.
But if I can maybe take the point from there on, I think, because I have been following the discussion since yesterday as well, we were talking about transition, 1.5 degree, renewable energy, water conservation, ocean, pollution. What I found maybe the most valuable is the starting point of double materiality. And where I think the whole value of the starting point of CSRD was making companies think and realize these major issues on their financial impact as well. Because when we speak about, like water, conservation, and if you're a factory that depends a lot on water in a region like this, and if there is a drought coming, and if the city needs to make a decision where that water is going to go, that is going to impact your production. And you need to make sure you are taking the steps now. And this is this big, link that the companies continue to fail to make that, or, they never think about the transition from a renewable energy perspective in the region. Do they actually have sufficient energy or not? But the CSRD, the whole transition plans, and so makes the company think and report where then the third parties need to realize and say to the city, like mayor, oh, do we actually have enough energy, and then how we should really restructure the, going. So I think, starting point was really important in CSRD, despite whether you are obligated to do or not. I think this is the one point, and this was, to me, the most, as a sustainability expert as well, the most valuable part. And then came the simplification, because of the complexity you spoke. Maybe just to continue with you, because you do have an overview of the SMEs, and so do you think that, we lost the sight of this, value chain or supply chain with this simplification? Or were you, in conviction that, no, this simplification was absolutely necessary?
The key point, this is what you said, is the exercise of double materiality. And this is a field of progress. And I'm totally convinced of that. Because our financial model are too financial centric. And so you have in mind probably different companies such as Orpea and so on, because it was a cash machine, but in fact it was the impact regarding extra financial points were not taken in consideration. And double materiality is very interesting because, and this is a field of progress, because you have to think about the consequences of the action of the companies in different fields, environment, social, and so on. And you have to think about the effect of the environment on your company. So you have materiality, financial, and impact, both. So this is very interesting, and I noticed that in our organization with all the direction, and mainly financial direction. We work a lot with the financial team. And afterwards, it's quite difficult. That depends the firms and the sectors of the firms, because it's not totally the same complication, in fact, and the same problematic. But I noticed that, for instance, SMEs in services, it's not so difficult, in fact, to realize this exercise. But you have to choose exactly, and you have to prepare the exercise. And the preparation is a key point in order to drive this process, because you have to think about the project, and this is not a tool or a reporting, this is a true project, in fact, for the company. And you have to connect all the direction involved, concerned. You have to think about your data lines, in fact, and the architecture of the data, warehouse, data, and so on, in order to see and to optimize, to streamline, in fact, this environment, in order to realize this exercise. So this is a field of progress, whatever the size of the company, in fact.
Yes. And Wolfgang, you want to...
Yeah, on the SME point, the CSRD comes 10, 15 years too late. And now, of course, we try to do it really quickly. And the Commission went too fast. But the obvious dilemma is that, for instance, in the automotive industry, up to 60% of the supply chain are SMEs. So if they don't have to report, you go somewhat blind on your supply chain. And many companies have 80–90% of their emissions in their supply chain. So that's the dilemma. On the other hand, the burden on many SMEs is simply too great. And so this simplification was necessary. And the hope is, from what I hear from the accounting firms, is that software tools, AI-based tools, will also, a lot of the work that currently is being done manually and with phone calls and emails, will also be done through triangulation with software that plugs into your procurement systems and can have a precise enough estimate. But there is a dilemma that is unresolved. And just the political backlash was too great, and it was too unfair on the SMEs.
So for corporates, do they even care that there is a CSRD reporting? Should they care if they have a CSRD reporting?
Well, that's interesting, because what we hear a lot is about the European Business Roundtable having pushed back against the CSRD and having asked for delay and simplification. And to be fair, there were maybe not craft errors, but there were mistakes being made. For instance, it was really difficult to understand the transition plan requirements in this CS3D, Supply Chain Directive, and the CSRD. And to align those is really important. So there was not enough coordination, and that has now come to bite the Commission. But what is less known is that major companies with major sustainability challenges, such as Mars, this giant that has emissions larger than the emissions of any European airline, for instance. Half of Mars is not chocolate, but pet food, so the entire meat supply chain is in there. Unilever, Nestle, Inditex, not Inditex, excuse me, Primark, one of the large fast fashion companies, they wrote a letter together in January this year to the Commission, asked them, please go ahead with the CSRD. And I find that really interesting. And then in France here, I think 400 chief sustainability officers of French companies did the same. They said, please don't diminish it. Why would they do that? They don't do that out of idealism, but they do that because they see a competitive advantage in everybody having to do this. Because in my work at Brunswick, we speak with a lot of companies that are making major investments into reducing their emissions across different sectors. But the baseline assumption in the public and in much of the media now is that everything's greenwashing. That's one problem, is that you barely dare to speak about that anymore, these investments in sustainability. The other one is that a competitor may be a free rider that does not invest, has a better profit margin as long as these sustainability investments are not mandatory, or at least are required to disclose. So this level playing field many companies have been asking for is what the CSRD provides. And I think that's a really strong signal that these companies came out in support of the CSRD, that this is not just red tape, but also green tape.
And do you want to...
Yes, I agree totally, and why SMEs have to work on these questions, in fact. First, you have a certain pressure of the financial regulators, ECB, ESMA, and banks and financial actors are obliged to push the system. So this is the first point. Another point is for the company, the employees. The employees have requests, want to see their companies realize action in environmental, climate, biodiversity, protection, and so on. So it's very important for attractiveness and to maintain the employees in the company. So this is important. And there's somewhere an analogy with the carbon footprint, and mainly the Scope 3. The large companies, in fact, need to ask to their supply chain information in order to consolidate and to realize the reporting. And it will be the same with CSRD. They will ask suppliers, upstream, downstream, clients and suppliers, information, probably not with the same granularity of information, but they will ask some information, and So for a company, small or medium enterprise, who will not who will not put in place action plan, who will not put in place a data system in order to provide information, it will be a bit complicated.
So I just wanted to, because you also mentioned the financial system needs to push, right? So, and our board member, Günther Tellinger, who is responsible for investment management as well as sustainability at Allianz, he had an, I would say, an amazing post yesterday on LinkedIn. I encourage you all read it, but I just wanted to have an excerpt because we mostly get the question why an insurance and investment company is so invested in sustainability and climate change. And he says that at that point, so he's referring to 3 degrees, you know, risk cannot be transferred, no insurance. Risk cannot be absorbed, no public capacity, and risk cannot be adapted to the physical limits exceeds. That means that no mortgages, no new real estate development, no long-term investment, no more the financial stability that we are feeling today. So this goes back to, you know, us really knowing the transition risk. And I think we spoke, Wolfgang, about the CSRD now making the commitments of net zero really, you know, tangible, and then what it actually requires from an investment perspective, right? So maybe you want to touch a little bit on the transition, you know, scenarios within the CSRD.
Yeah, I mean, to Günther Tellinger's remarkable post, I really recommend everyone read it. And much of what he describes as near future scenarios, some of it is playing out already in California and Florida, for instance, where in certain regions you cannot get an insurance for your mortgage anymore, which has direct consequences. If the house you own is your pension fund, effectively, or your nest egg for your family, if you can only sell to people who can pay in cash, that reduces the number of buyers, that lowers competition, and thus mostly the value of the house. So this is already happening. This what is now increasingly being coined as the uninsurability crisis, and the same, of course, applies to some city wanting to build a new airport or any other infrastructure project. So this is in the immediate. When it comes to financing, there is this gap opening up now between the asset managers and the asset owners, where, of course, we hear a lot about the large asset managers of this world who typically operate in a shorter time frame of the returns they have to provide and present also to their own shareholders, versus the asset owners, specifically the pension funds. A pension fund needs to think 15, 30 years ahead. And of course, in those scenarios, you cannot avoid what is in the books, what the scientists tell you, very conservative estimates such as those by the IPCC. And that tension is what we see now, because I think we have to acknowledge what we see across the news. ESG, isn't it over? The climate in the US as such, no pun intended, the political climate is such that universities take the word climate off their websites. Major corporations, even major NGOs now preferably speak about nature, for instance, and less about climate. So where does the CSRD sit then? And we see major asset owners, sovereign wealth funds, move the task of asset managing from the large American asset managers into Europe. And that comes back to this economic, while that is a sad development, it also shows that it can be an economic opportunity for Europe.
I fully agree with that. I think the climate change in itself is not waiting for us to make decisions and, you know, like the legislation and regulation to catch up with the speed of transition that is needed. I want to save a little bit time for us to get questions, if it would be okay for the audience and if they have questions. But maybe we move a little bit on then the what is next, you know, and maybe so with this whole, you know, simplification, are you now planning to stop what you have already done, or would you be more willing to voluntarily go forward with the I would say version 1 of CSRD instead of version 2, or would you propose like a different pathway going forward?
And this is the spirit of the omnibus, in fact. What is complicated, omnibus is in fact gather 3 types of regulations, in fact, CSRD, SFDR, and taxonomy. So it's a bit complicated and very complicated. Reason why there's a lot of discussions regarding this point, and it will take months to have a return of this. The difficulty is, of course, and we are totally convinced of this is what I said about simplification. We have to simplify for our SMEs. It's a key point. But in the same time, it's impossible to say, okay, you put the pencil down and you stop your action plan. Impossible, for the reason we develop. So we have to find the right path, in fact, to simplify and their solution. And VSME, it exists a solution with a good granularity of information, but easier than a CSRD exercise. But we are a bit afraid of one thing. If Omnibus is fully implemented, it will concern about 7,000 companies. And this is problematic because NFRD involved 11,000 companies. So we go back before 2017. So it's not a good point. Remember the target of CSRD, it was roughly 50,000 companies in Europe. So we said, okay, but we will, if you go in that direction, we will lose the spirit of what I call impact in our financial dimension, and to encourage companies to go ahead, whatever the granularity of their action plan. So there are a true question of this. We are optimists, of course, and we push the idea that the company have to go ahead, absolutely, but not to be at the top of the exercise. But reason why we develop all the strategy of accompagnement, etc., for the companies, in order to help them to go ahead on this topic. But right now, it's clear there's a question, and often I have companies, SMEs, who tell me, but what do you think we have to stop or to go ahead? What we have to do? And for instance, we say, go ahead, don't put the pencil down. And because the challenge is so important compared with the big challenge, climate risk, biodiversity, resources, water usage. And it's so huge and social. After the crisis, we have to rethink about our own model for each companies. Remember, in France, in 2022, 500,000 people quit their companies. So we have to think about this. Reason why we have to give sense and to go ahead on this point.
And Wolfgang?
I think there's one point I understood only what you said about going behind the NFRD. I didn't know that. That's really, really interesting. The value of the CSRD is not only in the individual report. And if anything, the reports are getting longer. There's this really interesting website, Sustainability Reporting Navigator. And it's an academic project, and they have now gathered 200 reports that are CSRD compliant. And they say, typically, the sustainability section in those reports is now 50% longer than last year's sustainability report. And you're now expected to have even more technical knowledge when you read them, which, of course, most people don't. So at the individual level, that's a problem. But now you have, because of this standardization, that in the old days, to use an extreme example, I can't think of a company that has done that, but technically it would have been possible in most European countries to publish your sustainability report on Christmas Eve as a PDF somewhere on your website, right? And technically you have published it. That, of course, the CSRD makes impossible. It needs to be part of your annual financial report. So that means typically an entire industry publishes their reports roughly in the same quarter. That will, for instance, change business journalism forever. Because you no longer need to be a sustainability expert who knows what to look for in a report. You can go to these tools like the one I just mentioned, or in the future the EU wants to have its own European single access point. And I can say, tell me what scope 3 subcategory is being reported across the entire cement industry. And show me a visualization of all major producers. So the transparency this brings for me as an investor, as a sustainability official in a company to, for the first time, be able to assess all my competitors in one go, that probably is one of the greatest benefits that this brings that required this standardization, where now in this report, every number, everything that relates to this taxonomy needs to be made machine readable and needs to be tagged. And we haven't seen the benefit of that yet. It's really early days.
Yes, and you wanted to add something?
I wanted just to add 2 points regarding figures from today. The cost of the climate risk regarding insurance company, 5 billion euros last year, huge.
Yeah.
And we are a bit afraid of this because some assets will meet difficulty to be insured, in fact. And the second point is for company will not so speed in their transformation. This is what we call a stranded asset, in fact, depreciation of asset and so on. And these companies will have very difficulty to find, this is where that you said, financing in the next future. Next year, in 2 years or 3 years. Reason why BP France, we take every company, even whatever the carbon level, because we want to transform their model absolutely, and because this is an urgency of state.
Yes. And then I would just like to take the pulse. Would you have questions? Okay, so just give me 1 second that I take it round, and then we'll give you the voice. So maybe just to add from my side 1 point to especially what Wolfgang said about the report and the transparency. And I've seen that, you know, you're mostly SMEs, entrepreneurs. The value at the moment, the published reports, is that you can actually transparently look at companies and see what they are needing, planning, and then see your position within it itself, that transition plan, and then go with a proposal. You know, I think this is what then the value comes. And then force yourself into thinking about CSRD, not maybe going through the whole reporting. Again, the reporting is an outcome. I think the value is that how do you take the strategic action and then bring it to your own organization to show that where you and your company, your vision, your value sits within that transition. And then it would bring the intended value through this whole directives and all of these things. So I think that is, to me at least, it was the everything behind it, and I am sad that it is, like it's assumed this was complex because maybe it's an account that wrote it, maybe they should have given to a sustainability expert. But so if we can have one, yes, maybe you can tell your name and your organization if you want.
Okay, hello everyone, I'm Victor. I'm currently working in an NGO, but my question is more about I feel like we're in the trap of qualitative data nowadays, because in reality, well, that's not really in the case in France, but in other, for example, in China, when we talk about sustainable issues, it's always the qualitative part we talk about. So it's always about environment, it's about carbon. But on the other hand, other non-qualitative issues, sometimes we tend to miss them. For example, now we dive into the TNFD or the biodiversity. It's really difficult to qualify it, and now we are like, we also have like water and print, and some companies are introduced the planetary boundary system into their companies. So I feel like these are of course important, but on the other hand, it's becoming more and more difficult to qualify. And those, like the impact on the local community, how you treat your employment, these are less qualitative issues, are not shed light on. How can we balance this, or is there anything we can do to to show the whole picture other than just trapped in the number issues.
So your question is whether how we can beyond that what we know today, or to get in a larger picture?
Yes, yes. No, what about those non-qualitative issues? I mean, they're still important, but...
I think everything can be quantified. So I think we just need to find the right metrics, right KPIs, and I think the whole, for example, significance framework was to be able to, like showcase that double materiality, like looking into all the issues that you have from including human rights or biodiversity. I think there is a lot of things that could show that, you, from a company of yourself, whether this is material to you or not, and then what is the impact, like that you need to take as a metric, but you wanted to...
Yeah, I think you have a point in that from those 200 publicly available CSRD compliant annual reports that are out now, that you can find on this website I mentioned, and I have nothing to do with them, they say that the double materiality assessments now look a bit bloated, in that that was the whole idea, is to pick your spot, to set your priorities. But due to the mechanics of the CSRD requirements, suddenly everything seems to be material, and that is a qualitative assessment that seems to have been made harder now.
Do you want it?
Yes, upstream you have to consider what is material or not for you, and on a technical point of view in the CSRD exercise, 60–70% is a qualitative approach. And this is very interesting because this is not only to put figures on an Excel spreadsheet. You have to think about your organization, to describe all the processes. Very interesting because each direction, your organization, the company, have to think about the process. So it's, this is a field of progress, this qualitative approach. I was afraid a bit to put only figures on a spreadsheet, and no, it's important to maintain a judgmental approach, yes, and to think about your organization, to think about your risk, to think about what is material or not, and to think about your impact. So the qualitative, the majority of the qualitative approach, I think this is a very good point.
Any other question? Oh, we have a question there.
Thank you. My name is Cedric. I'm working for a cooperative of SMEs engaged in sustainability in Belgium. I consider that the global system of reporting and in accountability and finance is not existing for more than 2 centuries. And so my question is, could we consider that what is in the way of the CSRD and other global reporting in sustainability could be in the future with the same global and comparative system that accountability?
I mean, that's very much the trend. There's the IFRS. I forgot what it stands for. If you do global business, you have to, if you plan an IPO in Europe, you typically have to shift to the IFRS financial reporting standard. And the IFRS has recently taken on what is the International Sustainability Standards Board. And that is very much the idea to create global sustainability standards. They're typically not as demanding as what the French government, British government, or the EU want, but it's considered the baseline. And the ISSB is also working on a transition plan standard, for instance. But even former, when it comes to climate reporting, laggards, you could say, such as Australia or Brazil, have now announced the integration of these global ISSB standards that, for instance, include Scope 3 disclosures for your supply chain. So this process is happening. The same, of course, has happened since World War II, as you say, not that long ago, on financial reporting. And the speed with which this consolidation is now happening on sustainability standards is breathtaking in comparison. It has happened within a few years now.
We have, for one very quick question.
Hi, thank you. Jenny Marie Larson, fondatrice of, happily supported by BPI startup Planetary Intelligence. wanted to ask about, at the national level, French or all nations, how does the CRD math get used to inform the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions? And is there a coming together of resource boundaries?
I'll give very quick, I think and we were discussing this, the whole idea behind CSRD is that, Europe or countries have committed to 1.5, and everybody was asking, how are we going to reach there, and what steps should we take? And then came the CSRD, like as a follow-up with SBTI, to make it really, tangible for companies to which steps they need to take in to create a sustainability strategy, what their transition plans should be, how they should look into their scope 3, what is qualified scope 3, so that the countries can see that how all these companies operating under that nation is going to help and support reach that point. So to me, that was the large piece of a puzzle, that is part of it. But if you would have a different...
Yeah, I mean, just very, very briefly, I think that's an excellent question, because what you refer to, these nationally determined contributions under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the country inventories are of vastly differing quality, and mostly, I think it's fair to say, not of great quality, and also not very current data, with all kinds of exemptions, such as military emissions and others. And yet, as we know from this global stocktake that happens under the Paris Agreement of saying how far did we get, last year it became even more evident how questionable the data is. And so for the EU, this is very much a motivation, not for the sake of scrutiny, but for the sake of actionability, of knowing what to do, given Europe's heightened vulnerability that I mentioned earlier. So this data is hugely important and helpful. So, I can't speak on the boundaries, though. That's too technical for me.
So we're out of time. But maybe last words, very short ones, that you want to close the session with, Philippe?
This is what I said. In fact, I encourage all the SMEs to go ahead and not to put the pencil down. This is very, very important. And if there's difficulty, they can find help with different programs in order to go ahead. But please, action. Thank you.
Okay.
I think this acceleration we're all sensing, I think we all need to make an effort to understand that we can't triangulate the next 5 years from the last 5 years, that this is not going to be a linear development, and CSRD and all the other things that seem so busy and why now can only be understood if we factor in how quickly things will accelerate now in our natural environment. And to end on a positive note, what I'm seeing in the corporate sector and the actions taken by many large corporates, of which I had a very different impression before getting into this field, gives me a lot of hope. So I would be really careful with this baseline assumption that everything is greenwashing. It is not. Take a closer look. There are fantastic actors and not so great actors. And what the CSRD makes visible are those role models in almost every sector of industry.
Mm-hmm. And maybe one final word. Thank you for listening to us, and in the, I would say, fascinating world of regulation. But regulation will drive the change for net zero, reaching 1.5. It is us who needs to really hang on to the parts that is valuable. We're going to drive this change. And I truly believe, despite the, this climax that we are in, if you follow the, where the economy is going, the progression of the renewables, and so we see that the change is happening, at the pace that maybe not as, as required as it is, but it is happening. It is, we are transforming. We're going to do it all together, and we're very glad that we were able to share with you all. And BP France has in the foyer have a stand, so if you would like to take more, discussion with them, and then as Allianz Trade, we have it, and we would welcome Wolfgang, so with Brunswick, to speak if you would like to continue the discussion and conversation. Thank you again.